joining us live. We're live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. And we're also recording this if you miss it and you want to listen afterwards, as well as making available on our new podcast, which is available through Spotify as well as many other channels. And it's called Humanising Work with Bailey and French. And that's exactly what we're talking about. We have a series of live discussions every weekday at midday. And we are talking about all things to do with humanising work and focusing in on human leadership, which is a new topic, something that's come to the forefront of a lot of leadership conversations at the moment, and also team flow. So how can leaders and teams work through this new normal and the future of work in the most positive and human way? And so we're running these live sessions to have some great discussions with our friends and expert practitioners that we work with, to really just bring it to life in terms of what's going on right now. And in terms of some of the topics that we're exploring, we know that we can improve how human workplaces feel in lots of different ways. But what are the best ways that we can use right now? We don't want to waste our time. We want to be as impactful as we can. And today I have the wonderful Taz Tarani joining me. Hello, Taz. It's lovely to see you.
It's lovely to be here.
Good. And we always have chats, so it's great to be able to record this one, definitely. And I was saying on my LinkedIn this morning, you know, it's always those conversations, you have great conversations with people and you go, God, I really wish I'd written that down. What did I say? And I'm hoping that we'll capture some of those good insights that we have when we're chatting through. So Taz, do you want to just give a brief overview of your background?
Yeah, I always actually find this a really interesting question, you know, it's the sense of which parts of myself do I choose to share in this type of a moment. And there's always like a choice there. And I just find that really interesting. So professionally, I'm an organizational psychologist and coach, and I have lots of areas of interest, but particularly leadership development. I've spent a lot of time particularly looking at authentic leadership, actually, but have a real interest in what we're going to be talking about today in terms of servant leadership. But a big part of my work that I've kind of moved into over the last maybe 3 to 4 years, even though it's been an area of great meaning to me for probably pretty much my whole life, is the diversity, inclusion, equity and justice space. And so I think the conversation that we're going to be having today is resonant on so many levels.
Yeah, thank you, Taz. And thanks for mentioning it as well, because actually I've personally gained so much from the conversations I've had with you, where we're just literally talking out loud and just sharing what's going on and how we're feeling, particularly in the last year. And I found it incredibly valuable, your insights and your experience really coming to the forefront. So I'm super happy to have you on today. Thank you so much for joining. So yeah, in terms of a bit of background of where we're at, we started talking about human leadership overall at the beginning of the week with Grace, thinking about, you know, what does it even mean to be human, and why would we use the emotional intelligence model to help us kind of understand and get into a little bit deeper around what are the real aspects, the details of what it means to be a human leader. So we first started talking about that at a high level, and then yesterday starting to explore the self-awareness as a foundation yesterday with Lindsay Foreman. And we had a really good discussion about how there's lots of ways you can develop your self-awareness and increase it as a leader or as anyone. And it happens naturally as well throughout your life, which is fantastic. But how can we accelerate that and make it as impactful as possible and introduce that in a way that we know is really positive for humanising the work, around using conversations that explore our strengths, that explore our purpose and help us be truly authentic. And that was a really interesting foundation and a conversation. And someone yesterday actually brought up the collective, the impact on the collective of expanding our self-awareness, which was a really nice link actually into today, thinking today about how we can really develop our other awareness. So we know that self-awareness is a great foundation for being a great leader in terms of our emotional intelligence. And on top of that, we build our awareness of others. And how can we do that in a really powerful way? So that's what I want to explore today, is like, what's the power of understanding others in this world? With everything that's gone on in the last year, we know that people are literally coming out of their personal bubbles where their reality has been very real for them, and yet other people have absolutely no idea what they've been through. And people have had such different and varied experiences. So really thinking about what can we can we share that we know makes a really big difference right now to the people we're talking to? Because I know, Taz, you're the same as me. You know, we're talking to clients and working with people all the time. We really are living and breathing this. So what goes on for people? And I started the conversation thinking about where does other awareness even come from? So Taz, kind of, what's your thoughts on the first steps of kind of other awareness, and where do we start?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes from it comes from just our really early experiences, and I think as human beings we're very different to other animals in the sense, and I was not planning on saying this at all, so it's really interesting that this is emerging, but you know, we're born incredibly vulnerable, aren't we, as human babies. We cannot fend for ourselves. And as we continue to grow into our first few months, and you'll know this as a mum, you'll start to see when your baby really has a sense of there is somebody else here. And our sense of I am different to somebody, and our ability to start to do that perspective taking starts to emerge, I think, at about 4-ish years, 3-4-ish years old. And it's such a huge part of how we function as human beings, isn't it? This kind of interrelatedness, this really coming into who we are through our relationship with others. And often, and I think that's a reason why this pandemic has been so challenging, because we know that we exist and who we are through our connections and through our relationships with others. Or that's definitely something that resonates for me. And I've got a kind of collective society background, being South Asian, even though I've been brought up in the UK. And so there's something fundamental to me about relatedness and about how we connect with each other, and also who we connect with, as well. That kind of is what immediately came up.
That's so it's so interesting, isn't it? Because we have people that ask us, and we need to develop our leaders' other awareness. What's the best way to do it? And we always have to start with self. But that doesn't mean that we ignore that collective sense of what's going on around us, how we're even developing, how we're seeing ourselves in comparison, how we understand other people in comparison to who we are. And one of the things that I really wanted to bring up today in this conversation was a couple of kind of old leadership theories that have, for me, stood the test of time, that are really important, that almost like help the leader start with themselves in terms of their other awareness. And for me, both Stewardship by Peter Block and Servant Leadership, brought about by Robert Greenleaf, have just been fundamental in my understanding of all leadership theories since then, where they really are talking about embracing the power of the whole, of everybody, and empowering people to be who they are and think for themselves and move forwards, and being a leader that starts with that as a principle. And I've noticed throughout my experience working with lots of different leaders that those leaders that do that, you can just tell how they are, how they relate to you, how they ask you questions, how they are open in the language that they use, or the intonation gives me an understanding of whether the principle for them is about actually serving the bigger goal. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I don't know how much that's relevant to what we're just talking about, but in terms of that build of
it. Absolutely. And I think there are 3 parts to servant leadership that I think are really useful to just hone in on and to explore. And people who obviously are familiar with servant leadership will know this. But the first piece is this kind of other orientation. Like you said, it's this real sense of calling to where the other person and their individual needs and wants and desires is at the forefront of everything that we do. And there's a real sense of caring about the welfare of others. And so we have this sense of a shift in focus from, this isn't necessarily about me and my growth as a leader and what I want to do and what I want to achieve. It's really about what can we achieve as a team, and what's important to these individuals that I'm working with. And I think that in and of itself is incredibly powerful as a way of thinking about things, because it really speaks to the sense of like sustainability, really. But what I think is really fascinating, which links to what you were saying before, is this notion of, well, in order to open up to the other, we have to have a sense of self. And this comes back to something really basic of I'm okay, you're okay. Yeah. So it's really basic. So if I'm in a space where I'm not okay, but I see you as okay, or either I'm not okay and I see you as not okay, I'm going to really struggle to be in a position where I can open to others. And that's likely because my fight-flight system is going to be going like this. And we know that when our fight-flight system is triggered, our prefrontal cortex shuts down. And so we don't have access to things like curiosity and openness and problem solving and perspective taking. And I think for me, it's really helpful to bear that in mind. So that kind of self-awareness and that groundedness, I think, within self, and this is where themes that we were talking about yesterday around strengths and authenticity really come through, are so important. The second area is around the focus on the individual. And I think that's been really key in this pandemic. So if we think about the pandemic, all of us have responded really differently. We've all had really different needs. Our situations have all been different. And I don't necessarily buy the sense that we're all in this together, actually, because I actually think that there's so much that's differentiated our experiences. And so servant leadership would say, well, I want to get to know that. I want to really hear about what are your needs and how do we accommodate for them? How can we meet them? How can we focus on your well-being as well as your growth, if that's something that's important to you? And then the last piece is that focus on the collective and that kind of long-term gain rather than the short term. So it's really simple. It's essentially saying, keeping that kind of focus on what are we trying to achieve here, and also who are we trying to achieve this for? So who are we serving? And I actually think that piece is so important, that who are we serving, and actually how do I know that I'm meeting the right audience or I'm meeting the right individuals, and who am I actually talking to when I'm having these conversations? So that's kind of initially what comes to mind for me.
And I like that transaction with it too. It feels that we are kind of more socially conscious and morally conscious of what we're doing to our people, our teams, our organisations, and the world. And for me, there's a strong link there as well, particularly around stewardship pieces. How are we serving the bigger goal here, the bigger objective? And how are we empowering everyone to be part of that journey? And you can't really empower people if you don't know what empowers them. And so my leadership journey has been really insightful, knowing that, as a leader, you've got it, you've got a direct sharing with people. Someone's big response can illuminate actually you've got a significant bias or about something that you knew. And how can we even promote platforms where leaders feel safe rather than judged to be open and vulnerable and honest, but do that in a way where they're trying to learn and coming from a learning perspective all the time, that they want to learn more about the people that they're working with, they want to learn more about their needs, their wants, their well-being, their performance goals. What is it that drives that individual, and what can they do to help serve that? And it hopefully doesn't need to almost be another thing either. It sometimes can be, actually combined with the journey that we're already on. We're quite clever at finding ways to overlap and align things, but there is something for me there about how do we present ourselves as leaders to enable our own awareness of others to grow, which I think taps into what you were just saying. And I wonder, in terms of kind of practical example, when a leader's stepping up to have a meeting with a team and talk to them about something, how might they introduce themselves in a way that does empower people to talk and share openly and does feel that there is acceptance for diversity of thought completely, and that's okay, that's psychological safety?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I actually often receive the feedback that that's what I offer people. And I try to kind of wonder, what is it that says to people that it's okay for you to be in this space? Because I think for me, that's so important, that it's a sense of you can show up here and it's okay for you to be here and to be in this space. And I think it comes from actually a place of being willing to say that we don't know. It was like what you said earlier about, you and I have had conversations, particularly over the last year, and particularly related to, following George Floyd's murder, etc. And there were things that you just didn't see, like it was just not on your radar. And so I think that going in with a sense of, I want to learn and I don't know, and it's okay that I don't know, I think is absolutely fundamental.
Just picking up on that point, that's a really great example, because it's a situation where I know many leaders felt very nervous about what to say, whether to say anything, because they didn't want to say the wrong thing. And certainly my approach is similar to yours. I think I'm quite expressive, so I tend to throw myself out there, and it takes some bravery to do that and some courage to be able to say, I'm not sure if I'm saying the right thing, but bear with me, I'm having a go because I care. And it's that compassion, almost like, I want to be part of this conversation, I want to have an input to this, but I don't know where I fit, I don't know where I can bring value, or if I can, or if just listening is the right thing. And it reminds me that I think you and I are fairly similar in terms of actually explaining that. We're quite explicit about our intentions when we talk, and actually that has worked for me in the past. So even on these live discussions, you're not scripted, you're not rehearsed, so you don't know what you're going to say, and it's quite easy to trip up and say something, and it's not going to be edited, and you think, oh my goodness, I wish I hadn't said that, because I think it came out wrong, but I don't know, someone could be judging me differently. But being able to say that the minute you've said it, for me, is just that kind of train of thought. Actually, I don't think I said that very well. I'm going to try and rephrase that, or actually, I'm not sure that sounded very good. And we've tried to do that. I try to do that quite a lot, actually, more as a leader now, because I found that to be effective. But there is something else, isn't there? There's something about being curious without judgment. And this was something I really wanted to get your thoughts on. Is this, how can we be curious? Be more curious as leaders without judgment, and what is the impact? Because how do you know if someone's bringing judgment or not? How do you leak that? That's kind of the fabric of how someone talks, isn't it?
And did you just use the word leak? I don't know if right. We leak, don't we? Like, we have these biases, we have these assumptions around people, and we leak. And so actually, I find the kind of without judgment piece really interesting, and it's something that actually in the mindfulness world we talk about a lot, because part of the definition of mindfulness is non-judgmentally, and I would actually say the opposite. Let's get curious about our judgment. Let's get curious about, well, what does trigger me? Because it's so easy to write people off straight away. There might be something prickly, when we first come into contact with somebody, and we can't quite put our finger on it. And so my sense is, well, can we get curious about that? Because the more curious we are about our judgments, the more we're then going to be able to understand where they're coming from, what the assumptions are that sit beneath them, how they play out without us even knowing. So what potential harm are we doing without even knowing that we're doing that harm? And to really, just come up close to that. And actually, then once we've got a sense of what are my judgments, what are the assumptions, then we can start to take action to start to address that and to really check ourselves. And I've got an example actually that comes to mind. I don't quite sure if it exactly fits within this conversation, but we'll see where it goes. But I was I was reading some papers. I'm lecturing at the moment, and I was reading some social psychology work, and there was this author Fisk that kept on being referred to. And then I was talking to a colleague, and I kept on referring to Fisk as a male. So I kept on saying, oh yeah, he said this really interesting thing, and I was reading about this, and this is what he was saying, and this was his line of arguments. And then I caught myself and I said, I have no idea if this author is male or female. And I felt so embarrassed because actually I then went and looked it up, and it was Susan Fisk. And Susan Fisk is actually a really well-known social psychologist. So I was massively beating myself up about this. But I think that I could have just carried on and not checked myself. And I think I was like, I really checked myself. I was like, no, I need to know, like this, it's not like just that knee-jerk assumption that I'm making. That's not okay. That's kind of part of the way that we've been conditioned in this world. And so I feel that that's really important, that we get curious and we ask ourselves those questions. You know, what am I thinking? What are my judgments? Like, who am I serving? How might what I'm saying land with different audiences and with different people?
Can I ask a question about that? Sorry to interrupt you. But I'm just trying to think about it from the other person's perspective. So if you're listening to someone and they are talking, and you can tell, you could, like, their judgment is kind of screaming at you, how can you positively help them see that?
I think so. It's a really good question, and this is what's really hard about doing work in the D&I space, and I often make mistakes as well, because I might say something and actually it just exacerbates the judgment rather than interrupts it. And so what I've learned is that it's about asking a question so that they can get more curious about their judgment. So rather than me trying to convince them that what they're saying isn't okay, even if for me that's what my interpretation is. So I'm also making a judgment, like, what you're saying is massively inappropriate. It's not okay. Your behavior isn't okay. But actually that doesn't necessarily, that can just, you know, when people are in their fight and flight and they're like this, if I then come at them like this, we're both going to be going like that. And so there's something around, can I pose a question that might help them to just see something a little bit differently, or get curious about what's showing up for them? So even just, I'm really noticing that there's a lot of reactivity here, and I'm just wondering what that's about. And now that might be quite a sharp question. That might not be appropriate depending on what's going on. But I think, you know, tell me more about this. You know, just those really basic, simple listening skills, coaching type questions, I think can really help people kind of find a sense of groundedness kind of when they're in that space,
Yeah, and I love that, you know, just being curious yourself, like role modeling what you want your leader to do with you, right? And so much of that is so necessary. As a leader myself, I've learned so much from my team in how they are with me, that it brings the best out of me to be able to see them as role models in that way. And I love that suggestion. That's absolutely spot on for me. So we've not got very long left. The last one I wanted to just delve into a little bit was around acceptance. Was how can we help ourselves or other leaders or people in terms of developing their other awareness of people? How can we be more accepting of others? And I think this is it brings me back to, I'm going back to all my old theory that I've learned throughout my training, but part of my counselling training was around exploring unconditional positive regard and entering every single meeting with that frame of reference. And it really stayed with me. And for me, that's real acceptance. That's acceptance of this person being a human being, and whatever they have to say is valid and important. And how can we bring that into the working world more? Because some people can do it really well, and you just know. But what is it that we can do or any of your thoughts on that? Sorry, I know we've not got long.
I think there's a few things. So one, there's something around exposure and I think education. And given that we don't have that much time, I think I'm probably just going to stick with that. That actually, like our human nature tells us that we're generally quite tribal, and so we tend to find difference challenging, and I know we haven't really talked about the systemic side of things. We're kind of staying on the interpersonal level at the moment, but I think there's something around who are we exposing ourselves to? Are we actually are we investing time in educating ourselves about kind of what the world is like? Yeah, so I think I'd probably say there's something around exposure. And I know that we often talk about listening. So listening seems to be a really big thing, but for me, listening alone isn't enough. We need to really go beyond listening to taking action as well. Sorry, I know that's kind of really quick, but I'm really conscious of time. So I thought that's probably...
I think, you know, you're spot on there. And I love the point around listening being an active piece, but there's something there around bravery and having a go as well, and not kind of sitting back and observing people, but actually being part of the change of what we're trying to influence everywhere. And I think that's really powerful and really strong. We've got some lovely questions and comments coming through on the comments feed, so we're not going to get a chance to get to those today, but I certainly myself and Taz will be going through those afterwards and responding to those on our platform. So please do check back and look at some of the conversations that I think this has kick-started. If I'm honest, I think we've got to kind of the core of some really important topics around this, but brought in, you know, a plethora of different lenses and ways of looking at it. But yeah, obviously, you know, half an hour is really just a taster in terms of such a complex kind of field and an amazing person who's got tons of expertise to share, Taz. So I'm very, very grateful, and thank you for joining us today. I think in kind of summing up and looking at what we've talked about in terms of other awareness, how can we develop our other awareness with greater acceptance, with less judgment? It seems to me that certainly it all starts with us, so it's not about the others. So there's that piece, but also how can we take more active role in our curiosity? How can we do that in a way that's supportive of others to do the same, so that we're learning and growing together? And that feels strong and powerful, actually. Because it is very much about, it's less exactly that, less about like you've judged me or I've judged you or we don't get on or we don't see the same things. It's much more about you're here, I'll put it in the screen that you're here and I'm here, let's go over here together. And I think that's that kind of journey that we're all on, really. Throughout our whole lives, you know, we're going to meet new people and see wonderful new things and challenges and experiences that will change how we see the world and others around us all the time. So how can we do that with, you know, an open heart and listen and be brave and courageous, to know that we're doing the right thing really inside when we're actually experiencing this world and leading in a positive way. So yeah, I'm gonna kind of wrap up now. Was there anything you wanted to add to that in terms of what we talked about, Taz?
No, I think that was a really helpful summary. I think for me, there's just an acknowledgement that we've been really focusing in on that kind of intra and interpersonal level. And actually, with a lot of this work, it's important to see how that then, how the kind of broader system kind of influences that, but also how we then influence it at the interpersonal level, that kind of broader system and culture. So that's probably the kind of piece that obviously we haven't had time to talk about today, but I think it's really important just to name. And
an important next step, absolutely, because this is not, you know, this is not in isolation. This is part of a very complex kind of context in terms of the conversation we're having. But as human beings, we are all capable to influence all of those things, whether they be systemic or kind of more interpersonal. So thank you so much. I've really enjoyed talking to you today, Taz, as I always do. I could literally talk to you for hours. It's been absolutely brilliant. I know we've had a lot of interest on the comments, and I'm hoping that our viewers and people watching the recording afterwards or listening to the audio have really enjoyed our conversation today, which is really around stewardship, servant leadership, acceptance, judgment, and all in the space around how can we be human as leaders? How can we do what we do best as humans in terms of embracing or understanding everyone around us in the best way we can, the most positive way we can. So thank you. We will be back tomorrow, which is Thursday at midday GMT. for another live discussion as part of this series, talking about self-management. How can we role model really well as leaders our resilience and our behaviours, our inclusive behaviours too. So I'm really looking forward to that conversation. Please do share this broadly with your network. We would love to have a conversation if you want to get in touch. But thank you so much, Taz. I hope you have a brilliant rest of your day, and I look forward to talking to you soon.
Likewise. Take care, Alex. Thank you so much for having me. It was really great. Yeah, really great conversation.
All right, I'll sign off now. Thank you very much, everybody.